Yep, I'm
Yep.
muting.
Okay. Right then. The purpose of this really is quite light-hearted. It's just to go through some of the phrases that sailors use or have used in the past and how they brought themselves into English. And I've tried to pick, as I said, some language that you'd be familiar with. But if not, well, we can, I can explain it as I go along. So I've tried. I did start to go into it alphabetically. Then it got a bit random. So you'll just bear with me as we go through it. Now, first phrase that I brought we want to mention is all above board. Now, again, anything above board, all above board, is often considered as something that's transparent. You can see it's open and honest. But actually, when it originally comes from anything above the waterline. So if you can see it, superstructure, it was visible, it was known as what was above board, and that phrase in itself had just transferred into modern language as we use it now. Another one which I like, but it doesn't mean anything particularly rude, and I've kept the image up there to demonstrate it. Over here, what it basically means is someone who works as hard as they can, working as hard as they can. And simply because if you look at the engine there, the old steam engine, um, those two brass balls are centrifugal governors. When the engine was going as fast as it could, they would be pushed out from the center. And basically the engine couldn't work any harder. So over here, I don't know if you use the phrase over there, if someone's going balls out, it means they're working as far and as hard as fast as they possibly can. Now this is another one. Okay, freeze the balls off a brass monkey. Now there are two origins that are rumored for this. Now the first one, which I tend not to believe, and I haven't recorded it, is that there's a brass plate. In fact, they do use a brass plate. It is called a monkey. All right, and they used to stack cannonballs on it, which are iron, and of course one would shrink in the cold weather, and the balls would drop off of it. And that is true. If you go on board if you go on board HMS Victory for a tour around there, they will show that to you. But in my view, the likelihood is the second origin that they're offering is the most likely because when you're at sea, I cannot imagine for 1 minute that you would be, especially in some rough weather, that you would be storing cannonballs on pyramids of brass. But this one is really relates to the small cannon, which was a very early cannon, which was made of brass, where the cannonballs were made of iron, and if one shrunk in the cold weather, it basically rendered it unusable. And so here it just means now it currently means it's cold, it's freezing, yeah. But in them days, it was used to as a phrase that relates to naval life. To the bitter end, something you may have heard, and I'm sure this is probably as modern as it's still a phrase used today. If you look at the little image at the end there, the rope at the end by the eye bolt is known as the bitter end. So if you're carrying on a task and you've worked on to the bitter end, it means you've carried on to the very end, but actually it relates to the anchor rope. Okay, so it's the absolute end of the anchor rope. And these are all phrases I've said that believe. I think I will add, though, of course, origins of words can be disputed, and some of these words as I've researched that I've discovered that people have said, well, it doesn't come from that, it comes from something else, and so, but I'm obviously choosing the nautical version. Ship shape and Bristol fashion, modern day, everything's neat and tidy, well organised. Bristol was a very, very popular port, not these days, on the west coast, and it was one of the major ports, and it was where it set the standard, okay, of seamanship and ship standards. And so, if everything was okay with your ship, it was up to Bristol standards. So, ship shape and Bristol fashion. By and large, another sailing phrase. In general, on the whole, or everything's considered, it's all okay by and large. It was originally used to describe a ship's ability, and as it says there, by means sailing directly into the wind, and large meant sailing with the wind blowing behind the ship. So it's basically there to describe its ship's handling ability. Cat's out the bag. This is one other favourite of mine. Again, one of the ones that's disputed. Cat's out the bag means if you've got a secret or something's come out now, you no turning back. Yada yada. Well, in the days of sail, if you were punished and had the cat of nine tails, a sailor, the first thing a sailor would happen, it would be given a rope. From that rope, he would be making his own cat, and it was only ever used once. And then it was once the cat was made, he'd pass it to the master at arms, and he would put it into a silk bag or leather canvas bag. I put there, but it could be silk. And then it's not taken out of the bag till the day of the punishment. Okay, and from that. You also get the phrase, of course, hardly room to swing a cat. So when they meant there's no room to swing a cat, they meant there's no room to uh, to use the cat of nine tails. Another one which I've mentioned to you in the past, actually, I thought it was worth keeping in cock up. Again, it sounds worse than it is. It indicates an error or a problem in a situation. Well, basically, what it is, I can't move my mouse on this. I'll bring it down. Okay, the gaff sail, which is there, and you've got the horizontal piece of timber going out to the right. The cock is at the end. It's got to go up horizontally. This is a seamanship evolution. If it doesn't, and it starts to go up, and it goes, it loses its level and starts to move up. It blocks. Basically, it will just seize the tackle, and it takes a long time to rectify it. Yeah. So an error or a problem in a situation over here, anyway, we use the word the phrase cock up. Copper bottom. That's probably something you'll be familiar with. If it's copper bottom, it's solid, it's reliable, it's comfortable, it's profitable. And of course, as you can see there, in the 18th century, they used copper to secure and seal the bottom of the boats. That, out of interest, that's the Cutty Sark at Greenwich. They've got this fantastic the way they present it now. They went for a major refit, and now they've got this glass dome, so you can underneath the hull of the ship is a part of the exhibition, and you can go down the stairs into the dry dock and inspect it from underneath as well as go on board. Chock-a-block. All right. Well, that over here again means if you're in a very confined space, or you're crammed or crowded, tightly put together. And again, naval phrase. It means that when the blocks came together, if they were pulled too close together, it couldn't be pulled for. It was chock. That was the way you used to call it, chock-a-block. It was It was stuck solid, and so basically it meant it was as tight together as it could be. And so again, the phrase chock-a-block. In the doghouse. This is the American naval originates from American ships. Obviously, the phrase now, if you're in the doghouse, to be in disfavor with someone, all right, so you're in trouble. Okay, it's a small cramped cabin. I didn't stop the ship. On some American ships, if there was not enough accommodation for the sailors at any particular part of the journey, they would be accommodated in this small cramped cabin on the superstructure as a part, and it was extremely unpopular with the crew. It was cramped, it was dirty, and not very good. And so they used to say, "Well, he's obviously not. He's in trouble. He's in the doghouse." Yeah. Turn a blind eye. You might have heard of this one. So pretend you ignore something. He's turned a blind eye, so he's ignoring a situation that he perhaps should respond to. And that originates, or it's attributed to Nelson, the Battle of Copenhagen, who was told to retreat and refused to. And I think he said words to the fact, "How can I see it? How can I see that signal? I can't see that signal," or something like that. And clearly, he went on to win the battle. This is one of my favourites. This, okay, three square meals and on the fiddle. Yeah. Well, sailors' plates used to be square. That's before, of course. Nowadays, everyone has these non-slip mats and platters or whatever. But in the days of Sal, it was a square plate, and in order to stop food running off the plate, they had a frame round it. Okay, and the frame is known as the fiddle. So the cook or the killick who was looking after the galley, you'd queue up with your square platter, and you'd put a dollop of food in the middle of the plate, and off you go. Now, it was a called a standard ration. Yeah, it was go in the middle, and that would be fine. But if you were doing favors for the chef, helping him out and doing things for him. Maybe, I don't know, if you're a shipwright, you might be making something for him. He might be inclined to give you extra portions, all right? And so if the food went on the frame, which was known as the fiddle, it meant he's doing something dodgy, he's doing something a little bit untoward, a little bit things that he shouldn't do. And so we use that phrase if someone's on the make, someone's doing something illegal or illicit, maybe filling their tax or something like that, as we would say. Then that's where that phrase originates from. I threw the photo on the left in. That's an old biscuit, okay, hardtack, and I just thought that was actually an original biscuit from that period. Was it 1784? That's in the museum in Portsmouth, and they used to eat those. They used to be really difficult to eat. They used to try and break them down sometimes, put them with some liquid. It would have been beer, not water. They didn't carry water on many sailing ships. It was only beer, and or they would eat it. And so, as you probably see, if you've seen Master and Commander, you'll see that they often riddle with weevils and things like that. But it's all protein, isn't it? Right. Filibuster. Now, this is a phrase that I think is quite. I don't need to tell you what the modern day explanation is. It's something that you use far more in the States than we do these days. But it originates from the blockades that were put up to stop the pirates. So there would be blockades that were used to stop them. I mean, originally it was it was referred directly to the pirates, but any sort of blockade became known as filibustering. Flogging a dead horse is another one. I don't know if you use that phrase, but basically, if you're flogging a dead horse in the UK, it means it's a complete waste of time and energy. You might just as well go home and make and drink some tea. It's just that it's a hopeless task, and that comes from the time when they recall when sailors got paid in advance, and that's always fatal, of course, in anyone's work or life. So once they've been paid, you're not going to get you're not going to get any much work out of them. And in their spare time, they often used to make a horse out of hessian or whatever material they had, and then they would hang up, as is that picture, okay, the dead horse. Okay. Now you've probably seen this. In fact, that's an American photograph, I think. It's running the gauntlet is when you're facing, as I say, you're facing a series of criticism. But in the military and the French, I think it originated from, but it was adopted by us, and I think adopted by you as a punishment. So you would be have to walk between two rows of sailors, and they would, well, originally it was hit you with a leather gauntlet, but from then it moved on to other things that were probably even less pleasant. Okay. Son of a gun, all right, to describe a cheeky or mischievous person. Okay, well, so British sailing ships anyway, I can't speak for any others, again, were cramped, but they had sailors were allowed to bring wives and girlfriends aboard, or maybe not even girlfriends, female company. And if some of the ladies that was on board perhaps had more than one person to keep them company, and if they fell pregnant, there was no real. They could never really verify who it was that was the father, and so any child that was born was logged on the ship's log as a son of a gun, and it was also between the guns was where the doctor surgeon would often act as the midwife, assist the birth. The head, I know you're familiar with that. I've heard it used in the States myself. Okay, slang for a toilet. And there, if you look at that, that's a museum. I've got a feeling no, it can't be the Mary Rose. I'm not sure what museum ship that is. But you can see the two heads there. There's one there. Head of the ship, we use as a toilet. We have a phrase called a tow rag here as well. And that's the rope. We didn't have toilet paper in those days. And so what you had a rope hanging down from the head. All right, two ropes that were hanging into the water, and that served that purpose. Know the ropes. Okay, to understand that's fine. To understand the job, again, there were many ropes, many tasks, and so a sailor or a qualified, skilled sailor, rated sailor, would know what purpose they all served. And so it was important for every young sailor, every lover, landsman who went to sea, um, got to learn that skill pretty quickly. And as I say, nowadays it's still used. We know the ropes. Does he understand the jobs? Does he understand how it works? Does, the mechanics of it. So, okay, swinging the lead. Again, a phrase here. To anyone who swings the lead is known as someone who shirks his duties. He's a, anything he'll get out of a job. A malingerer. Okay, I'm sure we've seen them everywhere. And that's because that again, the phrase stems from nautical. It was seen as an easy job, swinging the lead. It was a boring job because you'd be on there for a whole watch. Of course, I should explain for those who was swinging the lead was how they measured the ship, the depth of the sea. All right. So, so anyone who really didn't want to do any particularly hard work, any physical work, would volunteer to swing the lead. And so it was their way. His other shipmates might consider him to be lazy or a bit of a malingerer. Show a leg. Okay. All right. Nowadays we say show a leg, get out of bed. Simple as that. That's a phrase that's used I guess, in a military environment. And again, there were females on board. All right. Okay. So if a smooth leg was shown, she was, she was, well, if she was sharing a hammock, then the sailors would be typically given a few minutes to sort themselves out. All right. But if she was on her own, she was left to remain asleep. And shake a leg is very much the same sort of origin. I brought this in because it was mentioned the other day, and I thought it was quite funny. So I brought this one up again. Limey, historically a British sailor, although often used to describe all Brits, and it was just to prevent scurvy. They brought these limes in, and they were rationed. They stored well, they stowed well, they kept for a while, and they took them regularly, and it cured it, or stopped or slowed it down. I particularly like this one, something along these lines. So, it's when your boss says, "Look, I want you to do X, Y, and Z," but it gives you a bit of freedom. Just do it along those lines. That's how we want it done. A suggestion, a concept, without any real detail attached to it, and that's why we often get it wrong. But its origin, interesting enough, was comes from again the 16th century. Chippies, shipwrights would make ships from their past knowledge. They would build them on what they knew had to happen. And then in the 16th century, after that point, they introduced these line drawing. So the shipwrights would have to work to a plan. And so they'll be told you work along these lines, and these are the lines that you'll be manufacturing that ship from. And so we still use that phrase when we say, yeah, something along these lines. I love this one too. Loggerheads. I'm sure you've heard that. All right. Okay. To two people, I've tried to use Oxford English Dictionary descriptions on some of these, but when somebody strongly disagrees or they argue, that's a loggerhead there. Okay, it's used in dockyards. All right, it was a long iron tool, and what they used to do, they used to heat the end up, roll it over so they could melt the pitch or tar to seal, like the caulking to seal the wooden ships. All right. But of course, you've got two sailors or two dockies who had a bit of a fallout. The first things they're going to go for will be their loggerhead, right? And so people would say if they're having an argument, and it became a phrase that if they're having an argument and they're not, and it's a heated argument, that they are at loggerheads, and that's where that phrase comes from. Money for old rope is another great one. Okay, getting for money for something that's worthless. That's the phrase we use here. Money for old rope. That comes from the days when old ropes were actually useless. They had no real value. And so some sailors used to sell them off so they could be used as oakum or create oakum from it, which was put into pitch and tar and to seal the ships. Now, this is an interesting one because it's something that I didn't really, I knew through when I was doing a little bit of research on this one, that it's something that was commonly used. In fact, there was a big union issue in the 30s in the States because it was still being used then. And I forget which unit it was. I wish I could remember it now. It was a little bit while ago when I found out about it. But basically, to play everything at once, and that comes from the phrase that people, dockyard workers were often known as lumpers. People would carry stuff around, load ships, coal and or provisions, and so on and so forth. And they didn't pay them in installments; they just paid them at the end in one big lump sum or one sum of money, and that was became known as the lump sum. And like I was saying, I do remember reading somewhere about some in the States there was a big union issue where it was a practice that was still being used, and that they went to some lengths to stop it. Got it made. Okay, he's got it made. That's simple. Basically, midshipman, and again, I've got to refer you to Master and Commander because if you've seen that film, there's some really interesting parts that are quite accurate, I feel. Um, that you could be a midshipman up into your 30s. I mean, obviously now you're a midshipman for about a year and then you move on. But then you could be, if you didn't pass the qualifications, pass the exams, you could say. However, once you did pass those exams, your career was made for you. I mean, you would be off. Your career, you'd got it made because you'd almost certainly become a captain of a ship. And so that would even it might be a small vessel to start with, but you would move on. So once you pass your lieutenant's exam, then you got it made. She's the mainstay of the department. Um, Again, pretty straightforward, this one. Any sort of principal person, he or she's the mainstay of the department, a principal person that's important to the operation. And that's basically a rope. Okay, if it wasn't if it failed, it then the main mast would fail. So it was important. So to be say someone's a mainstay of the department or the mainstay of an organisation, it means they're vital. This is another one that is interesting. I don't know if it again in the American Navy that have days of sail, but overrated. We use that phrase quite a lot, don't we? We say Fred's he's overrated, or Nelly, she's, you know, they don't deserve the praise that they get. Well, in the days of sailors were advanced, and naval rating was advanced beyond his ability. So basically, the captain of a ship he decided on the rate of his sailors, whether it be ordinary seamen or lubbers, or whether it be able seamen. And if he overrated someone, if it basically meant the sailor wasn't up to the task, and he was an overrated, and then eventually disrated to where the sailors, where this captain felt he should be. So when someone's overrated, that's an interesting one that comes from the days of sail. Piping hot. Well, pretty straightforward, really. We look at when we say it's piping hot, it means it's absolutely red hot, ready to go. Probably your meal was ready there to eat, and that comes from the days when ships were piped hands to dinner. So, as you may be aware, there was obviously no tannoys, and so communications across a ship, especially when it was windy and bad weather, was made by pipes, bosun's call. And so there'd be certain pipes meant certain orders, still used in the Royal Navy today. And hands to dinner was piped. The dinner would be red hot, ready to eat. Another good one, ringleaders. Okay, round robins. All right, a ringleader is someone who organises a group. We know that. He's the troublemaker. He's the one who stirs it all up. Well, the term ringleader comes from this. They wanted to make a complaint. They would write the complaint, or the people who signed it would write on a circular ribbon so that no one knew who the actual instigator was. They knew that obviously the sailors knew. The person who's receiving the complaint might have a very good idea, but there was no first name at the head of the paper. So that's where the term ringleader comes from. Vogue, be fashionable. Okay, to move with the tide or current. Okay, to follow it. You're either in or out of vogue. Scant, again, barely enough, inadequate or limited in size and quantity. Okay. A scant wind is a breeze that shifts to become unhelpful. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. Scope, another might be considered a bit interesting. That's the range of or extent of something. What sort of scope have you got? You've just taken over a new job. What sort of range of where are my responsibilities? What scope have I got? It's the length of cable. Okay, when it runs out from the anchor, the amount of swing of freedom of movement. So how much freedom have I got? How much, to do my job? And then it's just, it comes from that. But you like this one? Three sheets to the wind. I think it's the best way of putting it. To be the victim of an excess of alcohol. All right, it's a part of a sail, and if it's not tied correctly and it flaps out of control, it causes the ship to steer an erratic course. So I guess at some stage in our young lives, we probably found that one of our sails wasn't tied down properly either. Skid row, hitting the skids, skid row on the life raft. Okay, so if hitting the skids, things are not going so well for you, are they? Uh, Snob, another interesting one. It's a phrase we use here, okay? A snob, person who looks down on others because of perceived superiorities in social class. Well, a snob is also in Britain, I don't know if you use the same phrase, is someone who's a cobbler, okay? Someone who makes shoes. But a ship's cobbler, and it's used this phrase because it's often perceived as someone who feels more important than the actual seaman. So if he's a snob, he's self-important, self-perceived importance above that of the average sailor. Okay, well, we're now going to go into some modern slang. So you most likely won't have heard some of these phrases. I don't think I've done anything that's going to be particularly out there. So I'll go through them one at a time. Hopefully, they will put a little bit of a smile on your face. Okay. Right. Well, one of the phrases is obviously we're not necessarily very complimentary to each other when it comes to the branches. And so our fleet air arm, the airborne arm of the Royal Navy, they're known as WAFUs. And that means, translated to WAFU is wet and flipping useless. Okay, that's what it stands for. And again, the submariners are not particularly kind to general service people, and they call us and our ships targets and skimmers. Pongos, okay. Army, the Royal sailors refer to soldiers as pongos, and that comes from the old saying, "Wherever they go, the pongos." And so again, I'm sure they've got some equally awful nicknames for us. Crabfats. Okay, the Royal Air Force known as Crowfats. Now there's some dispute over this. Some people say that it's because of the way they do their drill, they move to the side, like crabs do, and other people say that it is to do with their badge. They have a badge which has got like eight, looks like the thunderbolts, looks like a crab, and so they get that phrase. And we call the Air Force Crab Air. That's a nickname. Here's an array there of nicknames for the Padre. We have a good the Navy, the Royal Navy. We have a really good relationship with our Padre Carter. They have I don't know if it's the same in the American Navy, but they don't hold a rank, and they assume, unlike the RAF and the Army, they don't hold a rank, and they assume the rank of the person that they're talking to. It enables them to do their job a little bit easier. But there's some names there, some nicknames there, and they're fully aware of that. I've got a couple of friends of mine who are Padres, and they're more than aware of quite a few more. Sky Pilot, the Bish, God Bother, a Devil Dodger, Simbos. All right. White Mafia, anyone who joins or is a member of the logistics branch. Oh, that stems from the Royal Navy. Between the gold rings on a supply officer's uniform was a white felt. So between each gold ring was white felt that rung the distance. And the mafia, of course, well, we know we control everything, don't we? We do all the stores, the food, and everything. So they always think we're on the fiddle, if you remember that. Green is exactly the same. That's the nickname for the electricians in our Navy for exactly the same reason. Crushers, I don't really know what we call that naval patrol crushers, but that's I'm sure it's got some reason somewhere. Club swingers, PTIs, because that's how they used to do all their PT training. I'd be really interested. I'd love to hear at some stage what the American Navy nicknames for each of these people are. A barrack stanchion, someone who never goes ashore. All right, so if you're always on board, or you don't go off the base, barrack stanchion. A blanket stacker, or Jack Dusty, Jack of the Dust, I think they call him in the States and in the US Navy, is a stores rating, someone like myself. Oh yeah, and this is quite funny. I always think this way. You ask a pilot what he thinks about his thinks about observers, and he says he'd rather have the fuel. So I always find that tickles me a little bit. So these are an array of phrases that are used for describing people of dubious ability. And again, these I hope they're just going to put a little smile on your face. Okay, there's much use as a chocolate fire guard, as useful as an astro and a motorbike. My favourite is Muppet, the most useless person Pusser ever trained. Pusser is slang for the Royal Navy. Bombed out, he or she's bonkers. Break-in strain of a warm Snickers bar when someone's got absolutely no willpower and they're easily tempted. Gatling gob, someone who never stops talking. Oh, I missed that one there. And sorry, some general stuff here. Baby said steak and kidney pudding. Bombers is what we call nuclear submarines. A canteen cowboy is someone who's always in the naffy bar and considers himself to be one for the ladies. These are phrases that are given to somebody who spends an awful lot of time asleep. And any of you sailors that have watched this will know that you're always going to get someone who, when he's off watch, he's asleep. Okay, so canvas back. God, I won't read them all there. Horizontal champion always makes me laugh. Those are just flat back, canvas back. A mattress strapped to his back. Those are the sort of phrases that come out. Father famine, ship's caterer, deeps, and this is what general service ratings how they refer to submariners. And the black pig is a submarine. And I think, oh no, it's a little bit more, a little bit more. Dockyard tortoise. That's how we in Devonport, the Cornish pasty, HM Naval Base Devonport, Devon and Cornwall close to each other. In fact, actually, I discovered not long ago the Cornish pasty is a protected species. And we used to have the Oggy vans. That's another slang for Cornish pasty. And they used to come into the dockyard and we'd buy the old dockyard tortoises. All right. Dodgy Digger, another reference to a padre. Exocet. Now, this is if you by the time you see him coming, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And that's referring to someone who is generally you try to avoid. Sleeping, eyelid inspection, sleeping. Top gum is how we refer to our dentists. Fish head, general service is referred to by Wafu. So everyone has their own little nickname. And that is it really. I hope you've put a smile on your face. It was intended to, nothing more than that. And I'll now stop sharing unless you ask any questions.